Today's topic is one of very important one. In fact, I have posted this in the group. I see today's SMS as God says, answered my prayers. So I said, when even in Tamil newspapers, GDP is part in all the news items. Everybody is talking of GDP and all. Whether it is a developing country or developing country, export promotion is one of the important aspect. So once after the introduction of GST, what is the impact it is going to have? Is going to have on the custom side export. So it's one of the relevant topic. I thank Mr. Pathsare sir choosing this topic, and I welcome Mr. Pathsare sir. Now the floor is over to Mr. Pathsare sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. A.P. Srinivas, for the introduction, and a very good morning to all you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining on a Sunday morning. My first topic on anti-profiteering was a Sunday evening at 5 o'clock, and this on export promotion is on a Sunday morning. Yet, I think it's one of the very interesting topic. But this Sunday is more important, because today evening session will be the 50th session, and I congratulate all of you involved in organizing this seminar and doing it continuously for the last 50 sessions. I think everybody who is on this particular webinar should know that a great work is being done by the Madras Tax Bar and the organizers. I thank them and I congratulate them, because today evening session will be the 50th session. So I'm very happy that I am part of this Sunday as well. So thank you very much.
Sir, Partha sir, sorry to get in for one minute, sir. We will mute everyone and unmute only you so that we don't have disturbance, sir.
Sure. Okay.
Taken care of. You have taken care of it. Okay. Yes, Partha sir. Sorry, you may proceed.
Yeah, but I'm audible, no?
Very much, sir. Very much. Please.
Okay. Right. This India's export promotion schemes, is it time to bid farewell? The topic I had put in. Why? Because just imagine we have the merchandise export incentive scheme. We have the special economic zones in order to boost exports. We have 100% export oriented units to boost exports. You have 100% EHTP units. You have biotechnology parks. You are talking about advanced authorization. So you have a lot of these export promotion schemes. As a sovereign nation, are we not entitled to have export promotion schemes the way we want it? Or our sovereignty in a way is restricted by any international agreement to which we are a party? The interaction today is definitely the Indian export promotion schemes vis-a-vis what is happening within India. But what is more important is it is going to deal with the external constraints or the external international obligations which India is obligated to maintain. And as a result, what is happening to the Indian export promotion schemes, which have been there for the last 30 years, 40 years, etc., in various forms, and what is going to be the way forward. I think that's the crux of what I am going to talk about today. The agenda is something like this. Even though it is export promotion schemes, you are talking about a GATT 1947. Then I'm talking about GATT Uruguay round, which is GATT 1994, we talk about, and the formation of the World Trade Organization. And under that, there is an agreement called Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, which has ramifications for our export promotion schemes. And on top of that, there was a dispute between India and the United States on the various Indian export measures. And because of that dispute and the decision there, what are the ramifications? That is what will be in the discussions and conclusions. So this is what I'm going to talk about for the next maybe 75 or 80 minutes. I hope I'll be able to complete it because it is a very vast topic. But let's start with GATT 1947. Why I wanted to start What first is, that stands for General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So in the 1940s, what was more important for all the nations was that you must allow free flow of international trade in goods, and tariff barrier was a major export of goods from one country to another, and we had very high tariffs. For example, even before 1991, when we started off our economic liberalization, even at that time, our rate of customs duty, I'm talking about basic customs duty, was 80%. That's what we. So, if barrier, entry of goods from other countries into India was a very, very difficult one, in the sense it was in any case costlier for the Indian importer, and he may be able to obtain it from the Indian domestic industry. Therefore, the effort from 1947 under the GATT aegis was to continuously reduce the tariff barriers and promote international trade. Even before 1947 GATT, we had the League of Nations, where also there was a discussion, and of course, then slowly from also have non-tariff barriers. So tariff barrier alone is not the one which is affecting the free flow of goods, but non-tariff barriers. For example, you may say goods are not allowed to be imported unless you have a license. A license is a tariff barrier. So you can have different type of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers which prevent or impede the free flow of international trade. So GATT in 1947, when I say GATT 1947, it's like an act. Was the first formally thing where there was a round of discussions from 1947. Discussions are there on reduction of tariffs, etc., on various goods, and that was continuing. Now, after 1947, there are various rounds of discussions which take place in under the GATT. You have something like a Tokyo round of trade negotiations. You heard earlier you got a Kennedy round of negotiation like that. And the last of the trade negotiations in that series was the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, which was held from 1986 to 1994. It took 8 years the negotiation to get completed, and from that the legal text of that Uruguay round was called GATT 1994, and that GATT 1994 had sought about the formulation of the World Trade Organization from 1/1/1995. Therefore, from 1st of January 95 till today, what we are having is a World Trade Organization which enforces the various agreements to which all the member countries signatories to. You have no choice, but you have to follow them and you have to adhere to them. So from 1947 to various rounds of negotiation, continuously efforts were made to reduce the tariff barriers, and Uruguay round was the last one. After 1994, for 6 years there was a lull, and in 2000 the Doha round of trade negotiations started. Until 2020, it has not been concluded. It is getting into a lot of problems and discussions and arriving at consensus, the WTO, which we will leave for the present, which is not the subject matter of our topic. Now, very, very important. Sorry?
Done.
Are you able to hear me?
Sir, the people new joining, I request everyone, please mute your phone when you join in. Please continue.
Okay, I can continue.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you had the Uruguay round, this again, I wanted to give us a background to all the people. In Uruguay round, for the first time, a significant amount of departure took place from the earlier round of negotiations. All the earlier round of negotiations were interested in good reduction of tariff barriers in goods to promote export and import. There is free international trade across countries. But in the Uruguay round, for the first time, we got into new areas. The first one was the General Agreement on Trade in Services. So you can see the evolution from 1947 to 1994. When countries slowly become more and more developed, they have become, let's say, not very cost effective in respect to manufacture, but they move into the service sector, and then service becomes very, very important. Therefore, the developed countries brought in negotiation for general agreement on trade in services. So services become a very, very important concept. Then they also brought in a new aspects of intellectual property rights, so the TRIPS agreement, which talked about, again, as you progress further and further in the economy and good in manufacture, you start deriving more and more uniqueness by having intellectual property, a patent, a trademark, a copyright, or a design, or a geographical indication. You have a layout of integrated circuits, trade secrets. All these 7 different types of intellectual property was recognized, and all signatories to the GATT 1994 were to make all their intellectual property laws in line with the TRIPS agreement. You must have that as a minimum standard, better, but you cannot have something which is a tougher, something lower than the standard which was fixed in the TRIPS agreement. In addition, 2 subjects were always outside the trade negotiation. One was agriculture, the other was textiles and clothing. And textiles and clothing is very, very important for developing countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all of them, they have the maximum market for textiles and clothing. And for the first time in the Uruguay round, on the agreement on trade, textiles and clothing, as also on agriculture. Agriculture again was something which is totally outside any negotiation. It is very, very important for each country. It was not. So some semblance of an agreement was there, an agreement in agriculture. And these are going to be the future when you have negotiations, agriculture, textiles and clothing, trade in services. E-commerce and digital economy is the biggest stumbling block for the next round of negotiations, etc. Now, I gave all this background to see how the negotiations are progressing, but more important is when you must have free international trade, you must also have fair international trade. The trade must be fair and not unfair. Therefore, the GATT thought about that we must have some provision to correct if there is an unfair trade in international practice, then that must be corrected. Therefore, they brought in first the agreement on anti-dumping, which is how if goods are dumped from one country into another country, then it is not a fair trade, then there must be a mechanism to check. Therefore, they came with the anti-dumping agreement, which enabled a country to see if goods are dumped and the dumping was causing material injury to the domestic producer of the like goods, then they can impose a customs duty called anti-dumping duty, and it will not be covered under any of the other ceilings or bindings which you had given under the GATT or the WTO, and you can impose them. The second set of unfair trade was if exports are encouraged by providing subsidies by the government. Therefore, they talked about the agreement on some measures, and that is where all our export promotion schemes are getting covered under the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. To complete the picture, these are the true unfair trade remedy laws which are available within WTO. There is one more remedy called fair trade, which is called the safeguards, with which we will talk about on some other day, where there is no unfair trade by any country, but still, because the importing country is undertaking an economic liberalization and is making adjustments to its structural economy time to guard himself from the serious imports which are taking place. Therefore, for a temporary measure, a safeguard duty or a safeguard measure be imposed in order to protect the development of the domestic industry and give it time to withstand the competition. So, right from 1947 to 1994, when we progress, 2 important things which emerge are: 1, international trade must be free, that must be fair. If it is unfair in the sense that the goods are being dumped, in the sense that goods are being subsidized by the government of the exporting country, then there must be a provision in order to correct those situations. And the correction takes place through an investigation and imposition of a tax, a customs tax called anti-dumping duty. And in the case of subsidies, you impose a duty called countervailing duty. In fact, the correct measure of countervailing duty is to countervail the subsidies. Earlier, our additional duty of customs, we used to loosely refer to as countervailing duty. That's not a countervailing duty. It is an additional duty of customs equal to the local tax. Today, it is IGST. Earlier, it was excise duty, etc. and for that we have the special additional duty. And therefore, under this agreement, therefore, we have a very important commitment by India and the agreement called Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. What is this agreement? Under this agreement, what are India's obligations? And when this dispute was raised by the United States in 2018, that India's export promotion schemes are inconsistent with India's obligations under the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, and a ruling was given by a panel of 3 judges of the WTO that yes, India's 5 programs which were discussed in that particular report are inconsistent with the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, which of course means India has to take corrective measures. And that dispute, what is that dispute and how Government of India is proceeding on that, and that is what will be the discussions and conclusions. So just to very quickly summarize for all of you, I talked about GATT 1947 to Uruguay Round 1994 and formation of WTO. Only that there is an agreement called an Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, and under that agreement, if the government of an exporting country provides the subsidies as defined under that act, and as a result it is able to promote its exports, and the other country then can come and say you have violated your obligation, withdraw the subsidy. If you don't withdraw the subsidy, what are the consequences? Say that is going to be the sum and substance of what we are going to talk about. But you may say that this agreement was originally negotiated, I'm going to talk about it, has come into force from 1995 with the WTO. We were having so many such schemes. EOU is there from 1984. SEZ may be a free trade zones we had, but now we have SEZ. We have different, DEPB was earlier there, passbook scheme was there, EXIM scripts were there, special import licenses were there. Before 1991, we had a cash compensatory support. Simply, you export, you will be given a cash of 3% of the FOB value of 5%. Cash compensatory support was there. So all these things were there, and India was maintaining. Was not India taken to task between 1995 till 2018 when this WTO dispute started? That's the question is there, and we will see why all these things happened in 2018 and what was available to us before that is what is going to be the thing. Why this is important is it is based on this now you have to frame the export promotion schemes which are consistent with this agreement on subsidies, and these have impact on your direct taxes. It has an impact on the GST, therefore, and entirely done with reference to customs because it is import goods involved. Therefore, it has ramification on all the other tax laws which we are dealing with in the context of export promotion. Now, I'm just very quickly taking you through the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. It was not thought about 73 Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, not there. It was negotiated initially during the Tokyo round, which was between 1973 to 79. And I don't know whether you remember Lakshmi Kumaran's lecture. It was in the Tokyo round that the agreement on customs valuation was negotiated, and it was implemented from 1st of January 1980, the transaction value, which is the mother of all transaction values, whether it is in the excise or in the service tax or whether we talk about the GST. Transaction value is origin in the, and countries were given 8 years as a transition to implement, and therefore our first customs valuation rules in 1988 followed this Tokyo round, and then of course we have made some minor changes here and there. It became 2001 rules and all that. So in that round it was negotiated, but actually it was adopted only at the end of the Uruguay round in 1994, and therefore it is only from 1st of January 1995 that this Uruguay round agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures has come into force. What this particular agreement, the disciplines regarding what subsidies can be provided by a WTO member. If subsidies are given, can they still be actionable by the other country? Therefore, we talk about, can there be a countervailing measure that can be taken by any other member? Yes, if the grant of subsidy by one country and which enables the export of the goods to be easily done to another country. And if because of the subsidy and the lower price it causes injury in the other country, then other country can impose a duty to countervail the subsidy, which is called taking countervailing measures. For that, of course, subsidy is not enough. The subsidy is causing injury is important. That's the second thing. Then they also identify certain subsidies are prohibited subsidies. No country is allowed to adopt prohibited subsidies. So what we are going to see is what are these permitted subsidies, what are these prohibited subsidies, and how they affect our export promotion schemes. Before I go to the next slide, which is not in the slide, I just want to point out, when we have in the WTO, we talk about two types of agreements. One is called a multilateral agreement. We are aware of unilateral and bilateral agreements, etc. I negotiate with another country, a bilateral agreement, free trade agreement, etc. I negotiate. Multilateral is if the Uruguay round negotiated 23 different agreements, all member countries at that time, 136 or 138 member countries who are signatories there, I have to take all the 136 or leave it. There is no choice. I will take this agreement. I will not take this agreement. Therefore, the multilateral is all the agreements forming part of that by all the parties. Plurilateral agreements on the other, they are also forming part of the WTO. Plurilateral agreements, you have a choice whether you want to be bound by it or not bound by it. So we have certain agreements like, for example, agreement on civil aircraft. You have an agreement called agreement on government procurement. India says, I will not be party to that. Some countries are party. It's plurilateral. Therefore, I have choice whether to take it or not take it. I'll observe it for some time. If the implementation is good and I feel agreement, otherwise I will not. This agreement on subsidies and countervailing measure is part of the multilateral agreement. Anti-dumping is part of that. The customs valuation is part of that. Rules of origin are part of that. Safeguard measures are a part of this. The trade-related aspect of intellectual property is part of all multilateral, which means we are bound by all those agreements, and we have to ensure that we comply with our undertaking given to the international arena. So that is one thing I wanted to explain before I go to the. Now, this agreement which has come in 1995, and we are in now 2024 years, 25th year we are running. This is one of the agreements which has been heavily litigated in the World Trade Organization, and there is a rich jurisprudence which has been developed by the W panels on the body. Now, one very important development in the Uruguay round you must know is, yes, all of us agree that we will be bound by the agreement. What happens if one country does not do what it has agreed to be bound by? Therefore, we have the dispute settlement mechanism by which if one country finds another litigation, it can take that particular country to the litigation. It is country to country litigation in the WTO and not for any individual companies or anything. It is always country to country. And that dispute settlement mechanism has really worked very well between 95 and till today, establishing rich jurisprudence. India has taken many countries to WTO. Many countries have taken India to the WTO on avian influenza, solar panels, and automobile space manufacturing programs. So many different aspects India has also been taken, and India has also taken the other countries for violation of that agreement. So the dispute settlement mechanism again is a very, very important thing under the Uruguay round. And this agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures is one such agreement which has been heavily litigated in the WTO situation. Now I come to, because you must understand what is a subsidy according to the WTO, then and only then we can apply this to see whether any of our export measures constitute a subsidy, and then whether it is an actionable subsidy or whether it is a prohibited subsidy. All these things we need to look at. Therefore, it is very, very important to understand what is the definition of subsidy and countervailing measures. I put it in a simple form here. Subsidy means there is a financial contribution. What is financial contribution? Next slide. And that financial contribution must be given by the government or a public body. What is a government? What is a public body? We will see again definition. Now, it is not enough that a government or a public body gives a financial contribution, by giving that financial contribution, I as a government may give a financial contribution, but it may not confer a benefit. Therefore, you have to show that a benefit is conferred. And fourth is that financial contribution must be specific. If it is not specific, then it is again not a subsidy as per the definition. That is why you will see financial contribution plus the government or a public body plus a conferment of a benefit, but it being specific is what becomes a yes subject to the rigors of the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. For example, because of the COVID, the government decides the income tax across the board for all companies will be 15%. That is a sovereign right of the country to alter the tax rates. Tomorrow we say because of all the problems, let us not have 28%, 18% GST, we'll have only 12% for one more year till we improve from COVID. Suppose a decision like that is taken. These are decisions which are not specific, and therefore they say the right of the governments, whether the central, state or local bodies, etc., to alter the tax structures uniformly across the board is not said to confer a subsidy. And therefore, the very, very important question is the specificity is also a very, very important thing. And a lot of, I would say, decisions and jurisprudence in what is a financial contribution, is it specific? Is there a benefit conferred at all, or there is no benefit at all? Each one of that is subject to litigation and a subject matter of interpretation and also decisions. That is a financial contribution. 4 types of financial contributions have been identified. 1, there is a direct transfer of funds. And what does it mean? If the government gives a grant to an industry, if the government gives a loan to an industry, if the government invests in the equity of a particular company, that is a transfer of funds by the government into a private entity country. Whether this will give a benefit or not, I will take into to be done. Now, government may not give a thing, but it may give a sovereign guarantee. This is enhanced, and suppose you do not honor your commitment, then government is forced to honor that commitment by invoking the guarantee they have to pay, which means there is a potential transfer of funds from the government to an industry or an establishment or a group of industry or a group of establishment. We are going to talk about it. Therefore, when you talk about transfer of funds, it can be a financial grants, equity, loan, etc., or potential through a guarantee. The second is the most important thing with which we are going to be all talking about. Revenue otherwise due is foregone or not collected. So earlier, I was a 100% export oriented unit. I was exporting. I also could sell in the domestic tariff area. Now under section 80 HSC, I got an exemption for payment of tax on my export profits. This is clearly revenue otherwise due, which is because we say that it is related to exports, I am giving you an exemption. On the domestic profit, you still have to pay the tax. You are talking about revenue otherwise due is foregone or not collected. And this is where you will get into all types of exemptions, reductions, credit, etc., of various types of taxes. We are going to talk about tax on the final exported product, tax on the inputs which go into the product, tax on the capital goods which are used to manufacture an export product, income which is arising from the export of the particular product. All these exemptions, reductions, credits, etc., if they are otherwise due but are not foregone or not collected. That is why I said, if instead of section 80 HSC, a general exemption was granted to a set of enterprises, then you may say it's not with reference to export or domestic, it is a full exemption being granted. You also have issues with reference to regional, etc., we are going to talk about. Then, government provides goods or services. Normally, they say government should restrict itself to providing various general infrastructure. They should not get into purchase the goods, providing goods or services. So, if the government provides infrastructure, or if government purchases goods from a private enterprise, that could constitute a subsidy. I buy something from somebody, the market price is 500 rupees, I am government, I buy it 600 rupees. So by purchasing it at a higher price, I can provide him a subsidy. Similarly, I can provide certain goods or services which belong to government. Market price is 100, I give it to you at 80, therefore you are able to use it in the manufacturing export product. Therefore, they talk about a government providing goods or services or purchasing goods, just provide the general infrastructure. This is again very, very important. A lot of issues have come up in that. For example, in India, quite a lot of these things are controlled by public sector enterprises. NMDC gives iron ore exclusively. Therefore, a dispute arose where NMDC is a public body, and by providing iron ore at a price which may not be commensurate with what is the market price, a subsidy is being granted to the steel industry, because they get the iron ore, convert into steel, etc., manufacture steel product and export. So any goods or services provided very carefully. The last one is an indirect contribution. Instead of government or a public body directly doing it, government will pay funds, money to a funding mechanism, which will entrust or a direction to a private body to do all the acts which are done normally by the government. Even that will be covered under the definition of financial contribution. So for our purposes, whenever we are going to talk about the various schemes, the taxes due otherwise not collected is very, very important thing. In goods or services, that is definitely going to be there. There are some cases where even loan guarantees are given by the government. Those are affected by this particular definition. So this is the first thing, is financial contribution. This must be made by a government body or a public body. There's no difficulty. A ministry, a department, Director General of Foreign Trade, Central Board of Indirect Taxes, the direct taxes, all these are government bodies. They are government departments. The public body, you have Reserve Bank of India, you have Air India, you have any public sector entity. The shares are held by the President of India. All the board of directors are from the government and the ministry of the administrative ministry of the particular concern. So everything is controlled by the government. Therefore, it is a public body. So that is therefore contribute any financial contribution by public body will also come. Again, those who have been in the export business, for example, you may remember when some time back when you have a rate of 15%, 14%, 12% will be the rate of tax. But if you go to a bank and ask for a packing, it's called a packing credit for export, pre-export or post-export, 6.5% or 8%, when for normal domestic it will be 12 or 14%. Now this is mandated by the Reserve Bank of India, saying with reference to export, the rate of interest must be kept in this particular band. That has been held to provide a subsidy, because but for this direction by the Reserve Bank of India to the various banks, the rate these people would have got would have been much higher. Therefore, a benefit is conferred. Therefore, public bodies like Reserve Bank are also covered within the definition, and a subsidy could be given by the government. So, therefore, there is a financial contribution by a government or a public body. And now we are talking about a benefit must be conferred. It's not necessarily just because a financial contribution made to the government, there must necessarily be a benefit. So in every case, you have to prove that a benefit has been conferred. For example, I have written, if the government provides goods or services, they will look at whether these goods and services are provided at market rates. If they are provided at market rates, then fine, there will be no subsidy. But if they, then there could definitely be a subsidy. Similarly, if government provides a loan to an entity, they will look at what is the market rate for that particular loan, for that particular type of security or that industry, because that industry may be very highly secure industry, maybe not that secure industry. The rates will differ. You normally have a range of taxes, or every bank which gives money has a cost of borrowing. Are you giving at less than your cost of borrowing? Therefore, market rate, whether the rates at which the loans are given to certain entities or enterprises is less than this market rate, then your benefit is conferred. Now, third example, develop a road within an SEZ or in a particular industrial region. They say This is considered as a benefit if it is not for general use. That means if all the public can use that road, then it becomes a general infrastructure. But it is specific to all those industries that are situated within the zone and nobody else will be able to use it. They are considered on par with the general infrastructure. Even that could be considered as a benefit which is conferred by the government to the units which are located in the special economic zone. Government makes an equity investment in an entity. Then they ask a question, will a private enterprise be investing in the equity of this company in the facts and circumstances? If they would not have invested, but the government is investing, then they say, because the government investment is really a direct to that particular entity. So for every type of situation, that you have to arrive at a benchmark, the actual, and if the actual is less than the benchmark, you then say that benefit is thereby conferred. For example, you take our thing, we don't have the situation. Suppose you have to pay IGST at 18% on the supplies which you make. Now, when you make it export, that IGST it is a zero rated. Therefore, you don't have to pay suppose you pay IGST at 18%, you are entitled to refund. That provision is there. But suppose the government gives you refund at 20%, even though you paid at 20%, 18%. Then again, you are getting a benefit to the extent of the 2%. Therefore, in every situation, they will look at what is it that the government provides. Is there a benefit conferred by the process? If the benefit is conferred, then there is a financial contribution by the government and a benefit is conferred. The last requirement is the definition of specific is so wide that you will find in the WTO jurisprudence, you can prove any subsidy to be a specific subsidy. Because it says the subsidy can be specific to an enterprise or group of enterprises, or it can be sector specific, or it can be to industry or a collection of industries, which means you will cover everything. Even if there is only single industry, single entity in a single industry, it's a specific. But we say there's only one person which is available in the industry, therefore is taking. Sorry, the definition of specificity is it specific to the enterprise or enterprise group of enterprises, specific to an industry or a group of enterprises, then it is specific and then it becomes actionable. The other is region specific. Tax incentives, Northeastern region, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, all that's all region specific, then they are also considered to be specific. Therefore, we will not be able to get out of only on specificity. Deemed specific. Prohibited subsidies are by definition said to be deemed to be specific. And what we are going to talk about is prohibited subsidies. Therefore, there is a definition of specificity. Generally, if there is a subsidy being granted according to the definition, and if the subsidy is specific, it is actionable if it causes injury. But if a subsidy is provided and it comes under the category of a prohibited subsidy, then it proves specificity at all. And what we are going to see is about the prohibited subsidies. On the left hand side, you see actionable subsidies. If a subsidy causes adverse, therefore you have found a financial contribution given by the government, it is specific and a benefit is conferred, fine. But it is actionable only because of all the parameters, the export of the particular good to a particular country causes adverse effect, or then only it becomes actionable, otherwise it is still not actionable. So I may get a lot of subsidies which are not specific. As a result, I get an advantage. I export it to country A. In country A, there is no one manufacturing that. Then country A cannot do anything. I can still export to that country. But if there is somebody manufacturing the same goods in that country, and because of my export price they are affected, they say, please impose what is called a countervailing measure equal to subsidy which is granted. Then we come to the prohibited subsidy. So subsidies are prohibited. One is any subsidy which is contingent upon export. either as wholly or partly as a condition. All that I have left out important, but sir, any subsidy which is contingent upon export performance, or any subsidy which is contingent upon use of domestic goods over imported goods are prohibited. Now you see, you are importing capital goods under the EPCG. Normal rate is 10% is the tax. Government says, provided you fulfill 6 times the duty saved as an export performance. So in this case, the zero customs duty instead of 10% is contingent upon export performance. Notwithstanding that you can use the capital goods to manufacture and sell in the domestic market. Nobody is prohibiting you from selling in the domestic market, but you got the 10% benefit only because you undertook the export benefit. Therefore, it is contingent upon export performance. Now, if there is a condition, if any goods exported from India will be given a certain benefit, what does it mean? It means that you must use, let us say, to the extent, a certain extent minimum of domestically produced goods. Then that is also a prohibited goods. That is contingent upon use of domestic over imported inputs. That also is prohibited. Now, these are the 2 types of subsidies which are prohibited. And this is where all export promotion schemes will get covered. Now, I was telling you, it is there from 1/1/1995. Why did this problem occur in 2018? Important thing is there is an article 27.2 in the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures which says developing countries can provide prohibited subsidies. So that is why export subsidies are prohibited in developing countries. Now, what are developing countries was also mentioned in the agreement. There is an annex in that, all countries mentioned in the annex, and then they have said all other developing countries. Those all other developing countries included all countries whose per capita gross national product was less than 1,000. India was coming under that category in 1995. Our GNP per capita was less than 1,000. Therefore, we could have any export promotion scheme which may not be fully compliant with the requirement of the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures, but no country can take us to the WTO and say India has not fulfilled its obligation of the agreement. But the third bullet is say it is still actionable. It is still actionable. That is, India, because it is less than 1,000 GNP, therefore India is providing an export subsidy, but still that does not give right to cause injury to another country. Therefore, then if it was causing injury, they did not have a cause of action in the WTO, but they had a cause of action within their country by investigating the Indian exports and then imposing a duty called the countervailing duty to countervail the effect of the subsidy and then restore what we call as the level playing field. In India had faced the maximum number of action apart from China with USA, Europe, etc. on the ground that most of the export promotion schemes provided by India are actually prohibit export subsidies, and therefore they are entitled to be countervailed. The effect of this, I used to tell many people, you will also note that is, if Government of India gives a subsidy of 5%, and if that 5% is countervailed by the European Union, what it really means is whatever subsidy given by the European government as additional customs duty. So we are left with the same situation. Therefore, to the extent there was no action, even when there are subsidies were present, we were better off. But to the extent that there is a domestic industry and an injury is caused because subsidies import, the other country can impose. So it's a very, very tricky situation as far as this is concerned. It is under this exception we were comfortably doing it. I said per capita $1,000 per annum, which I have already pointed out. Least developed countries, we don't fall under that, but we fall under the countries whose GNP per capita is less than $1,000 per annum. Now, this is the background that all of you must know in order to appreciate these 5 schemes. When we are going to talk about export promotion schemes, what will happen to them. Therefore, if there is a subsidy by the government, a benefit is conferred, and as it is specific, it becomes actionable. If it is prohibited, it is also deemed. So in India specific, but it was not prohibited because India was still under the developing country. You can maintain it, but it is still actionable. But once you cross the threshold of $1,000 per annum, you are not even allowed to have such schemes in your book. And that is the problem which arose in this WTO dispute between India and the United States called export measures. And this was decided on 31st of October 2019, which India has appealed. I will come to that also very quickly. Very quickly, the background complaint is by the United States and India is a respondent. And 5 schemes were challenged by the United States. The EOU, EPCG, there is one scheme called the duty-free imports for exporters scheme and the merchandise export from India scheme. Many of you know this MEIS scheme is simply that if you are exporting a product to a particular product and in annexure to the DGFT schedule, that product and this is available and it says 3%, if you export it $100, they'll give you $3 straight away as an export promotion measure. You get that money. Now that particular scheme was also targeted, which is why you will be reading in all the newspapers, Government of India is withdrawing the MEIS scheme from 31st March, then 31st December, etc. We are talking, all this is because of this particular dispute which arose in 2018. Now very quickly, some dates, I don't think, just to give you an idea, in the WTO, before going to the dispute, the 2 countries must have a consultation. So after the consultation, if you cannot resolve the dispute amicably, then one country which is a complainant requests a panel to be formed. Panel means a panel of 3 judges. Then the panel is formed. Then arguments take place by both the parties, etc. Written submissions, pleadings, and oral argument in Geneva take place. Then the panel gives its finding, and then that gets circulated to the dispute settlement body. Now, when the panel report is circulated, if you want to appeal, you should appeal within 60 days. That also I am coming to later. If you appeal, then the panel report will not be adopted. That means you are not bound by it till the appeal is decided. And that is what India has done on the 19th of November 2019. We have lodged an appeal. And because our appeal is pending, to continue these schemes till you come up with the new schemes which are compliant with the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. Now, what we had was GNP 1000 per annum. Now in the 2001 Doha Ministerial Declaration, they said that it is, you must cross $1,000 per annum for 3 consecutive years. It's not that 1 year you pass, then next year you fall back, etc. But for 3 consecutive years, you must have more than $1,000 per annum GNP, and it must be what is published by the World Bank. And in 2013, 3 consecutive India had crossed the 1,000 per annum. It is because India crossed in 2016 and some usual political and diplomatic consultation did not result in any resolution that a dispute was brought by the United States in 2018, and of course the dispute got resolved. So we had this breathing time because we were less than $1,000. That got eliminated in 2016. That was the time when we were asked to comply with our obligations under the prohibited subsidies. And when they found that whatever compliant, a dispute was raised. Now, understanding the challenge measures, maybe I'm not going to take too much of time on this particular issue. This will quickly give you an idea. You don't have to read everything, it will be with you. The export-oriented unit scheme. What I wanted to do was challenge measures, but what's important is look at the amount of exports from the EOUs. In 1819, 87,000 crores was the export by the EOUs. So whatever are the benefits which have been given to the EOU in terms of customs duty exemption on all capital goods imported, on all inputs, all consumables, all services, everything you have granted, everything is given to you because you're undertaken to export and you're undertaken to get net foreign exchange earning. And even if you're getting goods from within the country, you can get it without payment of excise duty. So all this constituted a financial contribution and a prohibited subsidy under the agreement is what was the argument for the export-oriented unit. Now you look at the export promotion capital goods scheme. In the capital goods scheme, as I said, you are allowed to import the capital goods, zero duty, subject to your payment, you are saying that 6 times the due obligation, and because you get the benefit only because you're undertaking the export obligation, it is a prohibited subsidy. And if you look at it, with the number of authorization granted in 1819 has an export commitment of more than 96,000 crores. So that is the amount of export obligation we are talking about. You look at the special economic zones, very interesting, 2018-19 export is 7 lakh crores from the SEZ units. Most important is you get all duty exemptions on goods, capital goods, services, everything. You also get deductions under the Income Tax Act, and therefore, this is again from 2018 when they start the dispute, but when they start the dispute, they always go back to the first day from which you ought to have complied with, which in this case is 13, 14, 15, 3 years, you have crossed 1,000. So from 16 onwards, you ought not to have maintained. By maintaining it, you have nullified or impaired the benefit which I as United States would have got had you modified the schemes, is what the argument of the United States. Similarly, MES is the reward for export notified to notified markets, etc. And that also was challenged. And you find in 2018-19, the value of MES scripts was 39,000 and odd crores was what was given. So the benefit itself, we can see 39,000 crores. Export was 12 lakh 40 under the MEIS scheme, which of course there will be overlap because MEIS is also available to other exports also. But I'm just given this to give you the magnitude of the export from SEZ, EOU, under the EPCG scheme and various schemes. And what is sought to be done is the benefit under all these schemes is violative of India's commitment under the Agreement on Subsidies on Countervailing Measures. As I said, what is the remedy against a prohibited subsidy? There is an Article 4 which says any member country can challenge before a WTO panel, and if the panel rules that a member is providing the subsidies, such member has to withdraw them without delay. Now, subsidies in a slightly different footing than if you have other violations, then you get a reasonable time. Again, nothing is retrospective in the WTO system, everything is prospective. Therefore, if something is found today to be violative, I have to say, okay, I will rectify the situation, give me time between 12 months, 18 months. It is an agreement between the two countries, and then you withdraw that particular thing or bring in line your obligation, whatever is held to be violative. So in all other cases, you get some breathing time, 12 months, 18 months, etc. But in this particular case, because it is a prohibited subsidy and it has got ramifications, internally withdrawn without delay. Now, the United States simply said, whatever I followed, all these measures are a financial contribution, benefit is conferred, they are contingent upon export, therefore they are deemed specific, therefore they are prohibited, therefore India is violating. That's the argument of the United States. And India has crossed the 1,000 per annum share, therefore they don't have also the breathing time which is available in the agreement. Therefore, they must withdraw all these measures to the United States. India made one argument. Of course, sometimes we have to make the argument whether we find it to be arguable or not. Under the original ASEM agreement in 1995 when it came, if a country was having a prohibited subsidy, it had a transition period of 8 years within which it has to phase out. So all countries which had a prohibited subsidy were given time for 8 years to phase out. Now India said, for me, the 8 years will start only from 2006, a country liable to bring my export promotion schemes in line with the agreement. Because only 13, 14, 15, when I crossed the 3 years continuously $1,000 per annum, I should rectify. Therefore, I get 8 years from 2016 1st January is what we said, and we said I have to do it only in 2025. That argument was rejected, saying this one time 8 years was given only to those countries who are having a prohibited subsidy as on 1/1/1995. If the country was exempted, then the moment that they are not eligible for the exemption, they have to bring their measures in line immediately. They don't have the extra benefit of the transition period. That is what was stated in the particular case. So this particular thing is gone. Now, the most important argument on merits of the matter was, in the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures, there is an annex called Annex 1, which is the illustrative list of export subsidies. So it is of items which are said to be, these are all export subsidies no country can maintain. And India argued in terms of clause G, H and I of that Annex 1, whatever we are providing are not subsidy. And what I'm going to spend maybe 10-15 minutes, it's not going to be full 1 hour, half an hour, etc. for your questions. It will be slightly less because a big topic for me. There is in the Annex 1 clauses G, H and I. The moment you see them, you will understand because all of us are familiar with the particular clause to be given. All of us, we argue, when you argue in the court, you remember, we are allowed to export the product, not export the taxes along with that. Therefore, any taxes on the exported product cannot be levied. Any taxes on the inputs which are going to export product must also be given back, either as exemption or drawback. All these things is what we are talking about. If I use imported inputs, they must be exempted from import duty. If I am purchasing from the domestic market, either they should be exempt from the duty, or if I pay duty, I must be. Credit need not be reversed if I am exporting the product. All these are permitted under this G, H and I of Annex 1 of the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. Therefore, what India said was that whatever I am providing is falling within the ambit of the exemptions which are given under G, H and I of Annex 1 of the ASCM. Now, this is what was not upheld by the panel. Now, I have just given to you G, H and I. What it means is, for example, you read from the left-hand side, any exemption or remission of indirect taxes in respect of production and distribution of exported products, then in excess of is common for all the three. In excess of those levied in respect of the production and distribution of like products when sold for domestic consumption. So I take very simple example. I manufacture a product X. I sell that product X in the domestic market. It attracts a GST of 18%. Say, when this product X is exported, I exempt this 18% GST. It is not a subsidy. This is what it says, exemption of indirect taxes on exported product, so long it is not in excess of those levied on the production and distribution of like product when sold for domestic consumption. Therefore, when I sell in the domestic market 18%, when I export also, I give you exemption 18%, that is not a subsidy. For exported products, if I give 20% exemption, then 2% is a subsidy. Therefore, all our things, you know, export is GST at all, then nothing, you get your input tax credit as refund, or you utilize your ITC and pay output tax, you get exactly that amount of tax. If you get that amount of tax, it is not a subsidy. And we all know this is what we generally follow. Then you see paragraph H. Any exemption, remission, or deferral of prior stage cumulative indirect tax, it is input tax credit, prior stage cumulative indirect tax on goods used in the production of the exported product in excess of like prior stage cumulative indirect tax on goods or services used in the like product when sold for domestic consumption. It is again the same. I buy certain inputs, there is an indirect tax on that. I am allowed to take credit of that, use it for production of a final product. Then I sell the domestically and I also export. Now, if I say whatever the input tax which you have got, with reference to those inputs which go into the export product, to the extent of that, if you grant an exemption or problem, but if you grant more, if your ITC actually paid is 100 rupees, but I give you a remission or a refund of 105, then 5 is a subsidy. This again, all of us accept, no one gives you more than what you are entitled to. Then the last one is remission, etc. of import charges. Therefore, you can also use inputs, imported inputs in the manufactured exported product, giving exemption to the customs duties on those imported inputs when they are used for the manufactured export product and they have is again not a subsidy, which means all our advance authorization, I'm allowing inputs which actually go into the manufacturer's export products. Whatever is imported, I give only exemption from the customs duties on that. And so long as I fulfill that export obligation, that will not also constitute an export subsidy. So you can easily see the law very clearly world over recognizes output tax on the goods exported, input credit on inputs which are used in the export product, or remission of import duties on inputs which are imported and used in the exported product, so long as they are equal to the actual amounts paid or payable and not more, it is not a subsidy. It is only when you pay something in. But if you look at GH&I, we may feel generally most of our schemes should not have any problem. Here, important is paragraph G uses the goods. We are talking about prior stage input indirect taxes on goods or services used in the production of imported exported products. Therefore, we are talking about inputs. Therefore, question will come whether capital goods will be covered under the definition of inputs. Now, government argued simply, whatever I give as exemption for the all are consistent with what is called as footnote 1, read with this GH&I of Annex 1 of the ASCM. Therefore, the only problem was the input was defined as inputs means anything which is actually consumed and is present in the final exported product and includes fuel, energy, because fuel and energy you can't find physically, but they are getting incorporated as heat, etc., or catalysts which are used. The definition talks about energy, fuel, and catalyst physically required to be incorporated in the final product. Capital goods are very specifically not covered. And we said capital goods are also input consumed, and obviously the panel did not agree with our thing. Therefore, the EPCG scheme, because it grants exemption to capital goods and granting exemption taxes on capital goods used for export production is not covered under the four corners of the ASCM, the EPCG became a problem for Government of India to defend. The same thing occurred with EOI and SEZ also. You are allowed to input everything without payment of duty. To the extent of the inputs, you may be able to justify I did not get anything excess. But to the extent of the EPCG, you had a problem. In SEZ, in addition to EPCG or the capital goods tax, you also had the problem of the 10-year income tax holiday, which is clearly a prohibited subsidy. Therefore, in each one of them, there was one element or the other which was not permitted under the ASCM. Therefore, all these schemes became violation of the ASCM. And when it came to MES, MES simply had nothing to do. It simply said you export this product to this market, I'll give you 3%, 2%, etc. Therefore, this is clearly a prohibited subsidy, but India argued they were actually given as a refund of the various taxes which are consumed in the production of the exported products. These are not clearly identifiable taxes which I can clearly give them as credit, but they are embedded in the exported inputs. A, B, C, D taxes are there. I am taking input tax credit, no problem. But there are also intangible embedded taxes. For certain items, I am not allowed to, I am not allowing them input tax credit. But therefore, those taxes get embedded. But in order to compensate for them, we are providing the MES scheme, etc. That is what. But again, they did not accept, because unless and until you are able to prove the actual quantum which you pay is equal to a by the exporter and that is being refunded, you are not allowed to maintain such type of subsidies. That's what the argument, the final finding was there. Same thing with SEZ. I'm not talking about all of them very quickly. The 8-year period, what India argued, that also I have said. Now, the panel finding in all this you will find is inputs consumed in the production process are physically incorporated in the final product. Therefore, it must be physically incorporated. Obviously, capital goods cannot get physically incorporated. Components, etc., will definitely be there. Energy, fuel, catalyst, and oil. These are the only things which are permitted as inputs. Therefore, capital goods cannot be considered as inputs, etc. Therefore, any exemption or remission or drawback of taxes on capital goods is clearly a violation. That's what the panel held. Similarly, in the EOU, EHTP, and the biotechnology parks, etc., they talked about the remission of custom duties is not consistent. Again, capital goods was a major problem. Then also they said you didn't produce any evidence to show that these are relatable to the indirect taxes which are actually paid by the exporters on the inputs, and those are what is being refunded. I think heart of heart, all of us know MAS does not quantify, because if it is 2% or 3% of export product, if today the value is $100, you'll get 3. Tomorrow the price increase to $120, you'll get 3.6. To prove 3 or 3.6 are exactly certain inputs, indirect taxes on inputs, is impossible. MEAS is plain and simple a reward scheme. So we had, sorry, your MEAS scheme is also not consistent with the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. The same thing with SEs are also, because again of income tax, etc. also. Therefore, what is important is the last slide, the bullet, panel held that India should withdraw the schemes as under. Because these are prohibited subsidies, they should be withdrawn as soon as possible, you thought. Unlike other problems where the two countries can agree 12 months, the panel said the duty-free import scheme, 90 days you should withdraw. SC is that you must withdraw within 180 days, 6 months you should withdraw. The EOU and other schemes you should withdraw within 4 months, 120 days. Now, because we appealed, we have the breathing time, and we have another breathing time because of some other fortuitous circumstances, which also I'll quickly deal. Now, whenever a panel gives a finding, 3 judges give the finding, then that makes a final concerning the WTO dispute settlement. And when 16 days by the dispute settlement body. The dispute settlement body, the members, all the member countries of WTO constitute the dispute settlement body. In that body, this report will be presented. If it is adopted, it becomes law, and then you have to follow whatever is contained, unless appealed by a party to the dispute. Therefore, before 60 days, 31st October 2019, it came. Then India appealed on 19th November 2019. Therefore, this panel report was not or could not be adopted. And till the appellate procedure, that we had the breathing time. Now, very quickly, what is the appellate body? There's a 7-member body called the appellate body. These members are appointed by political agreements amongst various WTO members. They have a 4-year term, and one more extension of 4 years is possible. Total 8 years is there. Now, they review, like any other appeal court, only points of law, not with respect to facts, etc. And legal interpretation is what and they must have a quorum of minimum 3 judges in the appellate body. What we have from December is we don't have an appellate body of 3 members. That's the advantage, which just like what is now happening for the WHO funding. United States says, I will not fund $400 million, etc. Here also, United States has consistently been opposing the appointment of the appellate body since 2017. Now, because they say judicial activism, delays in disposal and all that, we will not go into the actual reasons. There are only 3 members, appellate body. One of them had retired also on the 10th of December 2019. Therefore, only 2 members. Therefore, there was no question of any appointment of any appellate body at any other member at present for it act. Therefore, our appeal lodged on 10th of November 2019 is in the cold storage. Until that is decided, we have the breathing time to decide our course of action of correcting any of these schemes to bring it in line with etc., or wait for the appellate body in case we can succeed on any points, and then modify those schemes which are held to be inconsistent by the appellate body. So the most important thing for us, therefore, is now non-functioning in the appellate body. There are earlier decisions. India automobile industries also, when we had the phased manufacturing program and all that, it was held to be inconsistent, and India implemented the decision. And just quickly giving a few cases where India lost. India avian influenza, the poultry thing, that also we lost when we stopped poultry imports to the United States, etc. That case also we lost. Similarly, on renewable energy, subsidies for the domestic solar energy was held to be illegal. And of course, we have confirmed implementation by not, then they can have, just like what we have in our general judicial. First is a panel, second is the appellate body. After the appellate body, the country has to implement. If there is no implementation, just like what we have a contempt of court, we have what is called a compliance panel. You report to a compliance panel saying country A has not complied with the appellate body. And if the compliance panel says they have not complied with, then you can retaliate by imposing sanctions, etc., against that particular company. That's how the appellate body system works in the WTO. All this is because these schemes have held to be inconsistent. Any other country to which we export can easily impose a countervailing measure saying the WTO panel has already held all these to be inconsistent, and because they are causing injury, I am imposing a countervailing measure, etc. So these are the ramifications, but according to me, this is not new. Already for the last 15 years, we have, for 20 years, we have, our exporters have been facing action in European Union, United States, etc. I have myself handled 70 such cases in the international forum. For it is not that it is definitely will be there, that we'll have to live with that. Now, if we don't withdraw after that, then as I said, retaliatory measures can be imposed and they can be punitively high also. So those are what the consequences. Now, therefore, the question comes, what is the fate of other export promotion schemes? We consider 5. You have still advance authorization, you have all industry rate of drawback, you have brand rate of drawback, you have so many different things. What is the fate of all of them? That's something which you have to also think about. Advance authorization, the chapter 4 of the foreign trade policy, it is specifically given with reference to inputs which are used in the manufactured exported product. It permits only those inputs that are physically incorporated. It also permits fuel, it also permits energy, it also permits packing material, catalyst, etc. All of these are allowed. And you are allowed to import these items as per the standard input-output norms which are specified by the Director General of Foreign Trade. The problem with this scheme, which I have handled in the last 15 years, is many countries say, you have a standard input-output norm. For 1 unit of the export product, 1.1 unit of the input is required. But you do not find whether they actually consume 1.1 or they consume only 1.05. If they consume only 1.05, that 0.05 is a subsidy. You are giving extra inputs without taxes to them. Therefore, your advance or the mechanism to verify whether the inputs which are imported are actually consumed in the exported product, because you can also use them after the export obligation is fulfilled. You can also sell it in the domestic market, the goods manufactured out of that under the advance authorization. That is why government later on came up with strict norms saying advance authorization, everything imported, you must have a very clear account of their coming into the factory, actual utilization, you have to account and prove it. People try to prove it by giving the exact quantity as actually utilized. But when investigations came and the European Union or the US investigating authorities come to India to your factory, they look at everything and they say, how is it that when you say export product, you are using 1.1, but when I find that you are using and manufacturing same for domestic market, you are actually consuming only 1.07. So all for domestic, you have got a lower ratio. For export alone, you are using 1.1. Therefore, and giving it is not consistent. That is what they said. Therefore, the scheme which they all contemplate, which is also prevalent in Europe and called invert processing, is you simply import inputs without payment of duty, it is deferred. You use them in the export product. To the extent of use, the deferral is closed, like a provisional assessment finalized without demanding duty. That is how they do. So they look at what are the quantities. They don't allow that to be used for any product and they're being sold in the domestic market. That is not permitted as of export. If you are using less, then for the remaining quantity, pay the tax and clear it in the domestic market, then you will not have a problem. So we are, even with the standard input out norm and the advance authorization, we may still have a problem unless we are able to prove the actual input given to you for import without payment of taxes or procurement without payment of taxes from the domestic market has actually been utilized. Similarly, duty drawback, there is a major objection in the last 10-15 years saying it is an average, it is not based on the actual. According to me, that problem is likely to continue. And according to brand rate is fixed specifically based on the actual duties which you have foregone on various inputs, etc. So it's really correct. But in India, what happens is they do the first exercise based on the actual, but continue the brand rate for 1 or 2 years. Then the government says, the investigating authority says, if you are doing it every transaction, I agree. But if you find once, give the trade and continue, prices might have increased, the duty might have decreased or increased, what is the loss or gain? Must all be very taking account of that. So even duty drawback can have implications under this particular scheme. And already, I'm just giving the last 2-3 slides. Already, investigations have been conducted, as I told you, both by the United States and also by the European Union. And they have countervailed in these oil country tubular goods, frozen freshwater shrimps, carbon steel flanges, etc. They have held advance authorization and drawback as also conferring a particular benefit. I'm not saying exists a problem in these cases. Now, 2 slides, what can India do? I just put the question is the remission of duties and taxes and export promotion scheme. All of you are hearing in the press about that. This is what is supposed to replace all these schemes by which you say on whatever goes into the export product, on every single item, you identify what are the taxes and duties which are embedded, compute them, and I will provide you the actual amounts, the RODT ECP. Now, generally, this is most of the industries have told me that it's not surprised because it's easier for them to do with the inputs, etc. But they are not getting something similar to MES, which is a clean 2% or 3% of the FOB product. It's not getting. Under the RODTEP, it will be actual duties which have been collected and given back or not collected on the export product, on the inputs. The inputs are whatever goes in. There is some problem on major inputs, etc. No problem, but on certain times where on the incoming things certain taxes are embedded, you are not able to calculate them or prove them to the satisfaction of the authorities for them to be granted. Because of these difficulties in actually quantifying that, we had the DTEP, DEPB scheme and all that, but because they have been held to be not consistent, we have to get into a mode where we are going to give taxes and duties which are identified and can be proved. Those alone can be given when you are exporting a product in order not to fall foul of the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. That's all from me. I knew I will not do it today at 12 o'clock because there is a lot of volume. I might have again spoken a little fast also, but I think generally you should be able to follow. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a slightly different topic in the sense it's not totally GST or customs or excise, etc. It is in the Director General of Foreign Trade Export Promotion Schemes, customs and IGST on one small angle, but more with the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. Thank you very much yet again for this opportunity. I'm now grateful. If there are any questions, if I can answer, I'll definitely do that.
Thank you, Bhatta, for giving a holistic view of the scheme and even the international background to it. Now we'll open for questions. You can either put your questions in the chat window or you can raise your hand so that I will unmute you and you can pose the question. Sir, Jayakumar sir has a question. He has raised his hand. I'll just unmute.
Yeah.
Can I ask questions, Patsati?
Yeah, please go ahead.
See, there are 2 external things that have happened recently. You know, one is this Brexit. Other one is this COVID-19.
Yeah.
So because of these 2, your input working, your subsidy, all the calculations, or does, that oil barrel, the seller has to pay $37 so the can be cleared. Now it is $20 internationally. Similarly, your Brexit, you said European Economic Community Agreement, your WTO, your DOGA, in all this understanding, certain subsidies have been considered to be prohibited subsidies. But because of these two classic historical chaos, I would say chaos, Brexit and COVID-19, should you think that any subsidy because of law? Can you clarify, please?
Sorry, after the Brexit, I lost your voice. Sorry.
Hello?
No, after the Brexit, you said?
Which is not, and COVID-19.
Uh-huh.
The international price of oil went for a 6.
Okay.
Now the seller has to pay $37 so that the buyer can clear it internationally, because you can't park the oil. There is no place to park the oils.
Okay.
So internationally, now Russia and US have reduced it somehow, and they brought it to 22 per barrel for June, July. Future. For in Indian conditions, COVID-19 has completely put all of us in a reverse mechanism for our pricing, which includes subsidies also. And kindly also bear in mind, in income tax, now subsidies is brought to tax as income in this 2020 Act. So all I'm saying is, any mechanism you work, you give a brilliant example of 105, comparing domestic transaction and international exports. In that scenario, any difference is considered to be a prohibited subsidy. Of course, appeal is pending in the panel, as you say. In today's scenario, there being no appeal forum adjudicating, there are a lot of supervening impossibility has taken place internationally. Should you think that any difference will be considered as a prohibited subsidy?
I don't think, thanks for the question. I don't think 19 or the Brexit has any impact on this particular decision, because we are first is we are talking about what is permitted under the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures and what is being done under these schemes. That's a simplicity, and it is with reference to those facts that the appeal will be decided. While you may say something to do with the COVID-19, is there a problem? That may be slightly different, but Brexit, according to me, we should not probably have any impact with reference to Brexit. Brexit has its own implications for them, or for our exports, or for their transaction with European Union, other countries, etc. That may be different. But with reference to 19, I think one of the things is, whenever you are not fulfilling an obligation which is cost on you under the WTO agreements, as always, there are exceptions. There is an Article 20, we have said exceptions. So whether we will be able to argue that this exception applies, therefore, notwithstanding the non-compliance, I am entitled to do this, that is something to be experimented. For example, you have security exceptions, you have got public health exceptions, etc. You have a patented product and it is very expensive, others cannot manufacture. But you have a public health emergency situation. The government says, I'm not bothered about your patent, etc. I've allowed 10 other people to manufacture and supply. If the patented fellow says that it is my patent, I am entitled to the monopoly, how can you allow it to manufacture, etc. Apart from domestic, even if you go to the TRIPS agreement, you have got an exception. So is for every time you are not complying with a particular requirement, you have to show you can bring it under that particular exception. But when this situation started in 2018, we had no such exception, and it will continue to appellate body as a continuation of the original procedure, and it will not bring you back into the, maybe if because of COVID, because of other economic situations, if our GNP comes below $1,000 per annum, whether we will be able to reintroduce that is a different question. Then you may get reintroduced because you are now 995. Therefore, I can have it till I cross 1,000 for 3 more years, you may argue and try to introduce. But for this particular case, and which is now pending with appellate body, you may not, in my humble opinion, Brexit or the oil price situation or COVID-19, I'm sorry, I don't think you can take it.
I quite agree with you. And one proposition of law, an appeal is only a continuation of the lawyer proceedings. and you find force majeure, act of God comes in for all laws all over the world. So we are not an exception to such, natural calamities and governmental regulations in India. So as you correctly put it, if it comes below 995, a review is possible by the tribunal. If the review is possible, your enhancement also is possible.
No, the way it would work is, I would say, the appellate body will not get into this. Appellate body will not get into this. Appellate body only will look at what is the legal interpretation or law which panel has made and which we say is not correct. That's all that we will say and stop with that. But the two countries then can agree, because of this COVID or 19, I will give you an extra time of 1 year to withdraw instead of 6 months or 120 days, etc. That is possible. That's all political and diplomatic things which will go on. But legally, you will not be able to do that.
Thanks very much. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have 3 people in line to ask the questions. I'm
Yeah.
going to unmute Maithili, madam.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Patsat. Good afternoon. It is a
Yeah, good afternoon, madam. Please.
Session. See, I have a very simple question about when the matter is pending before the appellate body and we don't know till when. The question is, what happens if the appellate body upholds the decision of the first panel, WTO panel? What would be the impact, or will we be, if we continue with the schemes, notwithstanding the pendency of the appeal, are we exposing ourselves to any punitive measures because the earlier order got upheld?
Yeah, a very good question, madam. We are not exposing ourselves to any punitive measures. As I said, because the panel report is not adopted and cannot be adopted because we appealed within that time, everything becomes operational only after the appellate body decides the issue. So, like what they gave 40 days, 60 days, 120 or 180 days, if the appellate body were to hold, let's say, uphold the entire finding of the panel, then on adoption of that appellate body report will go to the dispute settlement body and the body will adopt that report. And from when you adopt that report, they will give the time limit within which you have to implement. And everything, as I said, in the WTO is prospective. Therefore, you will not be exposing yourself to any retaliation for the past.
Okay, thank you very much.
So the next question is from Mr. Krishnanand. Sir, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
My specific question is the case laws and other things that you referred to, particularly the panel decision and the appeal pending for the appellate authority, pertains only to exports to the United States of America.
Yeah, the dispute was fought by the United States, but it is pertaining to 5 schemes. The decision will be whether these schemes per se are consistent or not.
But they are only inter se between India and the USA.
Correct.
Not other country which are part of the treaty, WTO.
Correct.
Now, irrespective of what decision the appellate panel takes, is it going to affect all these schemes in respect of all other countries or exports to all other countries?
It will, sir, because of the difficulty of him. You cannot have these schemes will operate when you export to European Union. These schemes will not be available if you are manufacturing and exporting to United States. You may not be able to do that in practical situation. What you are saying is right to that extent. US and India are involved. Therefore, once US and India is there. But when they say the scheme is inconsistent, United States will agree only when the scheme is modified so as to be consistent. But once you modify that, it will become consistent for all countries. But because European Union did not challenge, so all of them are, you have no, European Union, Japan, all of them are what we call in the WTO litigation as third party countries who are interested. The fight is between US and India, but there are third countries which join and they make submissions like an amicus curiae sort of thing. All of them are interested in saying that these duties, because European Union also said whatever are the India doing is not consistent with the obligation, Japan. So you have many countries who have joined this particular litigation, and we also do the same thing. If something is between US and the European Union, and if it affects our interest, we join that as a third party and we make our submissions and say what is to be done. Therefore, all the countries are watching this, and I've already kept this particular thing. The more important point according to me is the impracticability of implementing, saying I will use these schemes for US but not for European Union or for other countries. That's not practically possible.
Now, in continuation of what I said earlier, the dispute is only between India and the US before the original authority as well as before the appellate authority. There is no appellate authority as on date. And as on date, no other country other than the USA or India are party to the dispute with regard to the export schemes. Now, what happens is that do the other countries, if they want to implement and if the appellate authority's findings goes against India, can they implement straight away the appellate authority's order, or do they have to go before the original authority, put forth their findings, India be given a chance to put forth their stand, and then the appellate authorities' the findings be put before them before they implement it, or it can straight away be implemented?
No, let us assume, sir, the way I understand it, the appellate authority, let us presume, holds it against India or upholds the panel decision, correct?
One interjection. One interjection. Normally, it is in personam and not in rem. It is on that basis that I'm asking you this question.
No, this is precisely what I'm saying. See, while it is true that it is with reference to United States and India, but because it is with reference to a particular measure, and if that measure is modified to be in consonance with ASEM, it will become a measure for other countries. All I'm saying is you cannot have an EPCG scheme where I will permit capital goods to be imported without payment of duty and the export obligation is to be fulfilled by export to European Union. Technically, what you are saying is possible, but practically it's not possible is what I'm saying.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, the next question is from Rohan Muralidharan. Rohan, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Rohan, you can go ahead. There seems to be some issue at his side. I'll ask the question which has been sent in the chat window. There is one question from Mr. Ayush. What happens to SEIS? Can SEIS be termed as a prohibited subsidy, since even this can be termed as non-specific and therefore violative of ASCM?
Which SEIS? What is it?
SEIS.
Service Export from India scheme.
Yes.
A very, very good question. Right from GATT 1947 till GATT 1994, WTO until today, this is all with reference to goods. That is why MEIS is targeted, not SEIS. As of now, with reference to service, there is nothing similar to the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures for service. If you provide 2% of the FOB value of the services, I will give a credit. That cannot be brought under the ASEM. ASEM is restricted only to goods. Therefore, service incentive schemes are safe.
Okay. Sir, there is one long question which has been posted by Mr. Sanjay Kakkar. I would request him to pose the question himself. I'll just unmute him. Mr. Sanjay?
Yeah, hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
please.
Good morning, everybody. My question pertains to where is the disadvantage that India is having vis-a-vis China. Now, this GNP of $1,000 was discussed. I'm sure China will be much above $1,000. So how is China placed? They are able to give so many drawbacks or other subsidies to exports across the world and not invite that sort of litigation what India is facing.
Yeah.
Are we somewhere lacking in policy making? Are we somewhere deficient in our endeavors somewhere? Can you please help out with that?
I don't think we are lacking any policy matters, sir. I think the one advantage I would probably say is for China and disadvantage for us is, for us everything is in English, everything is in the website, everybody can easily read and put the questions. For China, you have to make a lot of efforts, availability in Chinese, what the scheme is, understand the scheme and put. That's what actually been causing. But you also remember that any number of Chinese schemes have been countervailed and been challenged, and China has lost a number of cases also in the WTO. but specifically with reference to schemes like what we have, MES, SES, and like that, they don't have identified schemes which have been brought before the WTO panel and got. But they have also faced the maximum number of subsidy cases across the world. And the second thing is they face one disadvantage vis-a-vis India. They are treated as what called as non-market economies in the world. They are not operating according to the principles of market. They are centrally controlled by most of the things. Things are given to them. Because of that, what has happened is nobody accepts their cost of production, etc., as correct, and they go with reference to cost in another what we call as a market economy country. And therefore, you can find that they face a lot of actions, and they also have very high rates of anti-dumping duty, subsidy duty, etc. in different countries. But despite all that, sometimes even with those duties, they are able to export. In some of them, they don't have a business. Then, of course, they start opening up branches in Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. Start manufacturing and exporting. Some of them really manufacturing. Some of them routing. You have all sorts of problems there. I don't think the answer would be that we are not policy-wise lacking or anything like that. But it is the structure of the government and the availability of information and the language. I think that is giving them a little edge which we are not having.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, we'll be taking Rohan's question. He has posted it. This will be the last question for the session.
Okay.
He is asking, insofar as EOU is concerned, was the complaint restricted to capital goods, or did USA complain on inputs exemption as well? If complaint contained inputs as well, then why did US not complain for advance authorization or drawback?
Yeah. Now, the answer to this question, one is, it's very difficult because I don't have the full pleading. But when they take one particular scheme, they try to take what is wrong in any one item to show that the scheme is not complying. Therefore, capital goods you take, you will be able to show that EOE permits capital good, therefore it is non-compliant. You take SEZ, both capital goods and income tax you can say, and you can get it out. So, and why advance authorization is a question we don't know. It's purely up to them to select whatever they want and put it. So advance authorization may come in the future, we don't know. But it's just like you are the first person, you are making an appeal, you decide what grounds to raise. So they have taken up these 5 schemes, that is all. There is no other reason which is available as to, it's not because they say advance authorization is compliant, therefore I'm not complying. No, there is no such thing which is coming out. They have selected these 5 schemes and targeted, that is all, nothing more than that.
Thank you, sir. So we have come to the conclusion of this session.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Madras Tax Board, thank you for presenting, and I also thank all the participants being here on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
This video recordings will be uploaded on the YouTube channel as well. We have a specific YouTube channel, the name Madras Tax Board Chennai. This will be uploaded there. You can also subscribe to that channel. And today evening we have a special seminar, which is going to be a 50th seminar, where we pay tributes to the immortal legends of our bar. It is going to be handled by a star-studded panel of 10 people. So please be there and have a good Sunday too. And APS sir, you have something to add to this?
Thanks for this. Thanks for the session. It was an enlightening one, and now important on the part after the GST is introduced. The SAR has taken through the various agreements, and he said that it's a general topic even compared to the other schemes under the GST and the Customs Act. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the second opportunity for me again on a Sunday. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Vishwanathan sir wanted to add something.
Yes, Vishwanathan? Yeah.
Sir, you are muted, sir. Please unmute yourself.
I only clapped saying that it was a wonderful lecture. Nothing else. You already closed it. I have no question.
No, no problem. You can ask if there is not. I don't think there's anything.
No,
Yeah.
no.
We are not that strict, you know.
No, only one thing is, why not the government take the drawback route and give that MES incentive through drawback? What will happen?
Yeah, see, what is happening, if you really see, is all industries with whom I have interacted, if it is only drawback, they find it is not attractive. That which means what? Actual amount of taxes or duties foregone on various inputs, etc., which go into the export product. I think they're all getting it. They feel that they must have a little more because of, within quote, structural or infrastructural inefficiencies within the Indian infrastructure system. So you need to compensate for them. The 2 or 3% comes for that is what their argument is. Now, when you take up the RODTEP scheme, I have interacted with 3 or 4 sectors. When I tell them, why don't you collect the data like what the government wants, and if you are able to show a higher percentage, why don't you get it with compulsion? There are 2 difficulties. One is they are getting much lower than what they are getting based on the income index. Second is there are other taxes which are embedded, but they are finding it is almost impossible to quantify it and provide evidence. That's where the problem as of now it is stuck. Now we are trying to push that to see in what way we can provide evidence, etc., so that we get what is our due. Not something more, not something less. That's what we are really trying to do, but it's a very difficult exercise.
Now my question is, why don't government itself come down and notionally increase the drawback so that they are getting their incentive and do it? That team is not under scrutiny.
Correct. So what you are saying is increase the drawback notionally. So to that extent, you postpone the problem till drawback is brought in a challenge and drawback is held to be thing. Till then you have a play role. Yes. Yeah, that's possible. Just like now, even MEAs will continue till 31st December because we have appealed and the appellate body is not there, so we have the breathing time. Yes, we are doing that. What you do is, as and when drawback is taken, it may take another 9 months, 10 months to decide. Till there, at least we can go on. That's one way of looking at it. But what they have now said is, let's look at the RODTEP thing, which is fully compliant. Let us see. If that is not going to happen, then of course we'll have to find other means by which we can provide and have some more breathing time. Finally, you have to become export competitive.
With the situation now, with the economy so much down,
yeah,
it's a very hardening fact. We have to face the situation.
Correct. See, that's what we have today is something extraordinary situation, but that is not we are justifying, but something else can be done, like what they are giving so much of loans, cashes, etc., and then time to repay your loans. So those things are something which you separately do, but we may not be able to use that to tweak any of these export promotion programs.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. The link for the today's evening session will be shared shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.